1 year after protesters stormed the U.S. Capitol in an effort to stop lawmakers from certifying the 2020 presidential election results, congressional leaders on both sides of the aisle have expressed interest in revising and updating the Electoral Count Act. The 1887 law governs how Congress certifies votes in presidential elections. Problems with the legislation were highlighted during the 2020 election, including the ability of Congress to challenge state electoral votes and the role of the vice president. For more on potential changes to the law, let's bring in Rick Pildes. He's a professor of constitutional law at New York University. He also served as a member of President Biden's commission on the Supreme Court. Rick, welcome. Thanks very much for being with us. So you co-wrote an opinion piece in the Washington Post calling for revisions to the Electoral Count Act. First of all, explain to us, what is the act and how did it become central to the January 6th insurrection?
So this is the act that is supposed to stabilize a presidential election that may be close and disputed. It was enacted in the aftermath of the most disputed presidential election we had in our history, which was after the Civil War in 1876. And it was designed to set the ground rules and a framework for how Congress and the states should relate to each other when it comes to the electoral vote process. But unfortunately, the law is unclear in many respects. Circumstances have changed. We've gotten away from what the law intended in many respects. And there's a real need for clarification and improvement in advance of the 2024 election, because this really is the law that should help guide us through a close and disputed presidential election, should we end up there.
So let's talk specifics then. What changes would you like to see made to the Electoral Count Act before the 2024 presidential election? And do you think there is a chance that it could happen?
So there are some changes that are fairly easy, I would say, and some that are more complicated or involve more complicated issues. So some of the easy ones are, we need to make clear that the vice president doesn't have any role other than to simply receive the votes. This has always been the understanding, but this has now been sort of put up for grabs a bit. Vice President Pence acted appropriately in not doing anything more than that in 2020 in the 2020 election, but we really need to clarify that. So that's gone as an issue. The way the law works now, it only takes one senator and one representative to agree to object to receiving a state's vote. And then the whole process stops, and we can have 2 hours of debate about that state. We need to have a much higher threshold, a larger number of representatives and senators who agree to object before we get into that process. Those are actually fairly straightforward issues, in my view. The more complicated ones are, what role should Congress play with respect to the states? Should Congress have the ability to decide there's something illegal about the state's voting process, and therefore we're going to second guess the outcome and reject the vote? Or should Congress have no power to second guess the voting process in a state and simply act as a receiver of these votes and just the institution that is there to formally tally them up? That's a more complicated issue. We're in a culture of tremendous distrust. Your previous segment about how Republicans and Democrats are so divided, even on what they see January 6th representing. In this culture of distrust, there's distrust of the role of state legislatures potentially in a presidential election, state secretaries of state. There's distrust of the role Congress might play. And so trying to figure out a structure that's going to provide the greatest legitimacy to the process in 2024, 2025, when the new Congress meets to receive the votes, trying to get clear rules that are broadly accepted is extremely important. I think there is a real opportunity, not right at this moment, but over the next 6 months or so, for significant bipartisan movement on this issue. We have seen members of both parties express concern about the need to update, modernize the Electoral Count Act. So I think there is some reasonable basis for some optimism that we may be able to move this forward.
What would you say, though, because I have read about some concern expressed on the part of Democrats, some Democrats, that this would effectively be a replacement, they fear, for any kind of federal voting rights legislation. We know that Vice President Kamala Harris told PBS that this idea of changing the Electoral Count Act was, quote, not a solution to the problem at hand. What would be your response to that?
Well, I agree that the Electoral Count Act is only one piece of the kinds of legislation that we ideally need to protect the voting process, the integrity of the process, access to the process. I certainly am not of the view that all we need to do is deal with the Electoral Count Act. But the Electoral Count Act is something that's important. It is something that needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed before we get close to the presidential election process in 2024. But I don't in any way see Electoral Count Act reform as the sort of only important voting reform that's necessary today.
Rick Pildes. Rick, thanks very much for sharing your perspective with us.
Sure.